The Huskies play Boise State this week, so you know what that means. It's time to talk about Boise State. You're here. It's Locked On Huskies. Let's go.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Another edition of Locked On Huskies. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. You can find all our work with Inside the Huskies at si.com/college/Washington. That's where we write with Fan Nation and Sports Illustrated. Lars, it's great to have you here as we are going to talk about some actual football. I know I've said that on multiple shows this week where we've talked a little bit about actual football, but we still haven't seen an actual game played. But today we are going to talk all about that actual game that we'll be playing this Saturday. But first, before we get into it, I have to remind everybody that this episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. Well, I mean, what else can we do besides just get right into it here? One of the first things that I wanted to make sure that we hit on today is what can Boise State do to win? They're currently 14.5-point underdogs. And, I have a feeling they might end up covering the spread. Do I think they win this game? Probably not, but I'm a jinx, so nobody take my word on anything. But it's something where there are avenues for them to win this game because some of their strengths play right into some Husky weaknesses. And the biggest one that Chuck Morrell talked about in his press conference on Monday is Taylen Green just running the ball as well as he does.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of always been a kryptonite of Washington quarterbacks. I mean, we saw it against Oregon last year at times with Bo Nix, where, yes, they were kind of able to contain him, but there were plenty of times when Bo was able to break it for 10, 15, 20 plus. And when you add those up at the end of the day, that, Boise State's a really scrappy team. I mean, Washington's lost to Boise State in the regular season before. And again, not under Kalen DeBoer, but again, so there's precedent here, and it's certainly not an opponent that they're taking lightly. But I think the combination, not like Taylen Green's ability to run, but both their dual-headed running backs. Yeah, I think this is kind of Washington at times was susceptible to the run game last year, and so I think that certainly is going to be the main area of attack for UW. Absolutely,
and I think it's something where the passing attack was fine last year for them. I know they're missing their top receiver, but when you just kind of look at it, if Boise State somehow finds a way to win this game, you think about Taylen Green and his legs. Yeah, George Halani's really good too, but I feel that UW can withstand a normal rushing attack. That's something that I feel like they won't necessarily have a ton of trouble with this year, especially with the Oregon States of the world. If they're just lining up to run the ball downhill and Washington decides to put 7 or 8 guys in the box, that's something that they would be able to defend decently well without, a ton of just big runs being broken through to the second and third levels. But it's something where it's something I wrote about on Inside the Huskies. You can go check it out, where Chuck Morrell talked a lot about how the quote is our concern for running quarterbacks is at an all-time high, which he makes a great point. The Huskies not only did they have to face Taylen Green in week 1, they have to face Caleb Williams, they have to face Bo Nix, they have to face Jaden DeLora, who can run pretty well. Those guys are on the schedule. And the question is, what are you going to do to contain them? And the thing that I wrote about was how having a healthy Edifon Ulofoshio just kind of cements that, we can play a quarterback spy, which is something we didn't necessarily see a whole ton of, especially in the Oregon game last year. And it's something I kept kind of watching, kept waiting for. I was like, when are they going to spy? When are they going to spy? And I think they did it a couple times when Eddie did get into the game, especially in the second half. But there weren't a whole lot of those moments. And it's something where if you have a whole game where, it's just Eddie's whole job in pass coverage is just spy the quarterback. That's all we need to do. Yeah, it essentially, takes somebody away from your coverage, but also it just eliminates so many other things that a good and a smart mobile quarterback can do in terms of just running and escaping the pocket.
Exactly. And I think also to that point with Eddie leading it from the linebackers, and you add Braylon Trice and GTF off the edge, it's almost kind of like a perfect pyramid there, where if Eddie is able to spy, you got 2 edges that are either going to force him up the middle or force him out. And Eddie is also a sideline linebacker, so he's able to cover with range. So I think that kind of, almost to your point, bodes perfectly well for Washington, because whether they flush him out right or left, you have that veteran presence there to be able to corral, whereas last season that wasn't always the case.
And it's something where, as we kind of just transition to the defensive side a little bit, Boise State's defense was awesome last year. There's no way around it. Andy Avalos is an awesome defensive coach. And I don't necessarily know how well they'll be able to contain Washington's offense, but I think there will definitely be some questions of, they like maybe early on it's, they made a couple of plays. Maybe they get a stop here, stop there. And those are things that I think that fans should keep an eye on because it is a definite possibility.
Exactly. And I think, first of all, it starts with maintaining and developing a strong run game. Because I think Boise State and everybody knows what Washington can do offense from a passing game perspective. But that's why the run game is so important to set that tone to where Dylan Johnson is getting 8 to 10 yards on the ground. That allows Penix to be able to take those shots down the field to where if you're starting with Penix is trying to go shot, that Boise State's going to allow to stay back and kind of play almost what Washington would do to Washington State in the Apple Cup, to where you're almost expecting the pass. You need to be able to have that element in the run game, and without Cam Davis, Dylan Johnson's going to have to set that tone from the running back room.
And that's something where we're probably going to see a pretty deep rotation of running back in the first week. Yeah, we just kind of talked about a little bit off air. We think that Dylan is going to end up taking the majority of the carries. Just as the season goes along, but it's something where why won't they try out Will Nixon or Daniel Ngata or Sam Adams, Richard Newton, whoever else, maybe Tybo Rogers get in the game, something we talked a little bit on previous show. But there are a lot of talented running backs in this room. And that's the one thing I'm really curious about when it comes to just kind of dissecting this Boise State defense is who's going to play, what's the snap count going to look like, and when they're out there, who's actually going to see the touches? Who's going to have the ball in their hands?
Exactly. And I think, when you take a look at Boise's secondary, it's pretty long, pretty athletic. And so it matches up well with Washington's receivers. And again, you would almost expect Washington's receivers to be able to have that in the room. But then again, that's kind of one of the hallmarks. And I believe Ryan Grubb talked about it on Monday, where he mentioned that one of the staples of Andy Avalos' defenses over the years has just been sound, disciplined guys. And Boise State, especially Andy Avalos' Broncos, they're not the kind of guys where you're going to blow them out 56, plus whatever. Just because the defensively, that's just not how they're aligned. That's just not what their scheme kind of allows for. You can get them by 2-3 touchdowns, but it's going to be like 35-10. It's going to be 30 to 3. It's going to be a little lower scoring just because that defense is so assignment sound. Opposing offenses, Washington included, it just has to be on their mark at all times because Boise State is a team that can jump you and get it and force a few turnovers. And Washington was susceptible to that at times last year. So I think it's just a matter of not falling into those tracks if you're UW. I
think that, it's just kind of to that point that Andy Avalos is going to throw some different looks at Michael Penix that maybe he didn't see at any points last year because, as we said, he's a very, very talented defensive coach. And, maybe it'll force some tough throws and who knows, maybe there will be an interception. Maybe we'll see something like that. And Boise State did receive some votes in the first AP poll of the year. So this really isn't any slouch of a team.
No, that's not necessarily, not even close. And I think it's kind of, especially they were 10-4 last season. They returned a lot of guys. Obviously, Skinner's gone, but most of their players are back this season, especially on defense. And Spencer Danielson now in his second season as defensive coordinator. Him and Andy, I think, have a little bit more understanding about each other and kind of know what they like and what they don't like, what works and what doesn't work. And so I think that also kind of bodes in, similar to how Washington and Ryan Grubb, Michael Penix, there's a little bit more familiarity there. It's the same thing on Boise State's side. So it's, again, a great offense against a strong defense. It's exactly what you want to start a college football season.
And, I would say that it might end up being a pretty tough job to put away Boise State, but LinkedIn Jobs is here to help with everything. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates. That's why you've checked out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's so easy to create a job on LinkedIn Jobs. All you have to do is add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. If we'd used LinkedIn Jobs, I feel like that would have been really easy when we hired you. Just you were the right team member to add to this crew. And I love that. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Okay, so we talked a little bit about what Boise can do to win, and I feel like this is a bit of a different conversation. What's going to be I have a similar answer to the first segment, but what's going to be the biggest test for Washington in week 1, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think outside of the obvious, which I'll let you defer to that one, I think it's the ability. So one thing about Boise State's offensive line is a little intriguing. They have a first time starter, a left tackle, and right guard. But the rest of the offensive line is pretty veteran. The starting center's played every single position along the offensive line.
But so this is his first time under center.
Exactly. So there's a bit of familiarity, but there's a lot of uncertainty. And so I think it's an interesting mix. And so I think one of Washington's biggest elements, can Boise State contain Washington's pass rush, whether it's from edge with Trice and ZTF, or even up the middle with Ale and Tuatele and, maybe Javon Parker and the likes, and Boyd Chanufi, who else. If they can contain that, that will allow your answer to come to fruition a little bit better.
Right. And, it's I appreciate the handoff there. I appreciate that transition. It's in my opinion, and it's something that I really want to just go back to on Sunday, on Monday, on Tuesday, and just kind of rewatch the game and rewatch the film of what they're asking Edefon Ulofoshio to do against both the run and the pass, because I'm sure we're going to see some read option stuff. I'm sure we're going to see when Taylor Green drops back to pass that we are going to see some spy looks, because that's something that, again, I can't harp on it enough, because this is supposed to be such a big year for this program. But if mobile quarterbacks can kind of do whatever they want against this defense, all these high hopes that fans that we've seen, that the media is starting to pump up, they're not going to go very far. I feel like it's that simple.
Exactly. Well, it also starts with a couple of players last year. I mean, I mentioned one, Michel Powell, who now is the starting Husky. He was outside corner last year and great in run defense. He's kind of almost that second spy, to where as a bigger, nickel corner, you need to be able to have him stay sound, disciplined, and contain those runs, because that's why Asa Turner was forced to make a lot of tackles in the second and third level last season, because they didn't have that initial push. If Eddie can get everything set up correctly, I think it'll allow both Asa and Mish to kind of come up and play a little bit more of a role in the run support. I know Dom can play some run as well, but I think those two especially. I mean, Asa hasn't shown it a ton didn't show it a ton last year, but I think he has the ability to come down and be a solid tackler in the right scheme, and I think Eddie can set everybody up like that perfectly.
And when you talk about tackling, that's another thing that I just really want to see, where, there are a lot of questions about how well is this team going to tackle. And you don't want to force Asa and Dom to come downhill and make a lot of stops. I know it's something we talked about last week, where it's, we don't want to see these guys making a lot of tackles. Sure, if Dom Hampton's playing up in the box, he's going to be forced to, and that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. But if we kind of look back at this and it's, Dom Hampton had to come all the way down to make that tackle to prevent that 7-yard run from turning into an 18, 19-yard run, that's a whole different story. And that's something that would be a huge issue for this defense as a whole.
Exactly. And it gets back, it starts with everything up front, because if Boise State's able to start and kind of control the clock and control the run game and start to gash these 4 or 5, 6-yard runs, those later in the game become, to your point, 18, 20+ yard games. And that's how you allow guys in opposing offenses to stay in the game, to not shut it down early. Because if you're able to enter halftime and you have a solid control, I mean, it's the Michigan State recipe from last season, where they shut down the run game. Patrick couldn't really do a ton in the passing games, because everything went around Broussard last year. For Michigan State is what I'm referencing here. It's the same thing with Gentry and Helani for Boise State, where it's like, hey, we know who the running backs are. If you can shut it down early, they might get to 80, 90 yards by the end of the game. But when you have a 3-touchdown lead, that doesn't necessarily matter.
I got to take a minute here just to remind everybody about Locked On College Football Live. College football season is here, and this season, Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On College Football Live. Each Friday, Locked On will go live from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications, conference rivalry games, and go in depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Live every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on any Locked On College YouTube channel that includes right here on Locked On Huskies. You won't want to miss it. And, so I feel like we have to talk a little bit about the offense because it's something I mentioned, again, a little bit in the first segment here. But I think that the biggest test is going to be what kind of looks is Andy Avalos going to throw at Michael Penix? And it's something where if they work, if, let's say there are a couple PBUs or an interception maybe at any point in the game, are those looks that we're going to end up seeing later on in the year where, maybe a Tosh Lupoy or an Alex Grinch. I wanted to use those references just so I could take 10 seconds to say I'd be shocked if it happens with those two gentlemen in particular. But if somebody looks at this film and they say, oh, this look caused some trouble for Penix, maybe we should install something like that for Washington week. Is that something that you think Andy Avalos could do, is just throw some coverages that maybe he hasn't seen before?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of think, especially, when you have almost an entire offseason to prepare, not necessarily that coaches are doing that, but, you're always kind of thinking, hey, when we start the season now, April, May, June, July, August, you're thinking, okay, well, what can we work in extra maybe for this first week and try it out? And Andy is one of the greatest guys at doing that. I think almost kind of the defensive Ryan Grubb, if you will. He's really able to scheme up and do a lot of different things. I don't know necessarily how much power. I mean, Boise State doesn't have that Braylon Trice or that, ZTF coming off the edge. So they don't necessarily have those guys. But one thing that Andy can do is scheme well. And I think he's got enough athletes on that side of the ball for the Broncos to where he's going to throw some interesting looks. And I think the onus is going to be on Washington to pick it up. And the curious thing is, are they going to test Parker Braylesford up the middle? Are they going to bring a second blitzer, maybe from the second level down to come through on Penix if, Parker's not able to handle that? And so I think there's certainly ways in which Andy's going to be able to do. I'm curious to see how it's going to come to fruition.
And it's something where I like your point of talking about Parker, where I think that just kind of on the opposite side here, I think that Ryan Grubb might try to show his faith in Parker early on and just say, you know what, let's pull you on a couple of plays. Let's get you out in front. Let's see what you can really do. And, your first start, let's see what's going on here. I think that's something that we could see as well, just kind of the opposite side of that.
And that certainly also doesn't hurt that he's got Roger Rosengard next to him, to where if you want to run off the right side and really kind of set that tone, you absolutely can. I mean, you know what? It reminds me of, I wonder if Ryan's going to do the same thing they did to Oregon on the first drive, where they opened up, or the touchdown to Wayne Talapapa, where the gates just opened up and you got Roger on one side and I believe Brandon Valu and the rest of the line on the other side, because Roger allows you to do that, and that's going to help Parker be able to establish himself and just because all five offensive linemen just have to do their job against any opponent, especially Boise State, especially when Andy's going to be throwing different looks at him. And it's up to Parker to be able to pick up all those different things. And one thing that's actually in Parker's credit is he knows multiple positions. So even though he hasn't necessarily played them at the college level and when the lights are on Saturday, he has the understanding. It's just a matter of applying that on a game day.
All right, let's move forward here because I want to talk about predictions, matchup previews, and one thing I want to do. I haven't necessarily looked at all of the FanDuel lines. I'm sure not all of them are out yet for this game, but one thing that I wanted to do is just have a little bit of fun and just do a stat prediction each. So I want to open with that. If there is one, it can be as bold or as as laid back as you like. Do you have any just kind of numbers? Just say, oh yeah, if somebody out there is checking out FanDuel, I want to throw a couple bucks on this Washington game. Is there any parlay or just any prop, anything like that you think might hit this weekend?
I would probably say there's got to be one for Dylan Johnson to go plus maybe three total touchdowns, because he's going to have at least one.
I was going to say, why do you do this?
I mean, you set that one up for me. Perfect. I thought we were just doing the reverse handoff here. But Dylan Johnson would probably be a safe bet. You know, another one that could be sneaky, going back to our conversation yesterday, Michael Penix to have 5 total touchdowns, 4 passing, 1 rushing.
I like that. So because you just stole the Dylan Johnson thing right from under me, like you normally do, I want to say, so outside of the top 3 receivers, and it kind of works in tune with your Penix one here, Jeremy Bernard, anytime touchdown scorer. I think that'd be a fun one.
And what the bonus for that? He's also on kickoff return. So that could be where that one cashes in, even though I'm not sure that's exactly where you were thinking of it.
Nope,
so that's another potential outcome there. And I think also, I remember Kalen DeBoer said last year, this doesn't necessarily matter for this game, but one thing that's always stayed true to every single national championship that he's won is he's had a special teams touchdown. So it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if Washington wants to make it to the national championship to start the season off with a special teams touchdown as well, to your point.
Just saying the last time a Husky team entered the regular season with all this preseason hype is, watch out for this team to make the playoff. John Ross scored a first quarter return touchdown against Rutgers 2016. So, I felt like I could add that on there too.
Look at that. Look at that.
So another thing that I want to talk about in just terms of looking at the matchup, something you just touched on a little bit, is I wanted to talk about Washington's defensive line against this Boise State offensive line. Because you're right, there are some veterans on the line, but especially when you look at the center position and some of these less experienced guys, it's just all the positions that kind of where Washington has a strength, because we know they have a strength just along the defensive line as a whole. And especially when you just think about Braylon Trice, you think about ZTF, and you think about just some of the pass rushers that you can see up the middle when they're right. And, just from some of the things we've seen from them throughout the course of fall camp is, I think that basically every game is, but I think that this game could be put away early by Washington's defensive line. If, this whole, they're playing a group of 5 school, if that holds true, I think that if you look back at that game, you say, it's because the defensive line just destroyed Boise's offensive line.
And not to reference another one of our episodes, one of the massive, not massive, I should say, but one of the bold predictions I had, Braylon Trice 15 plus sacks. Yeah. If he has three to start off, wouldn't be the worst way to get that campaign going.
15 and a half. You gotta hit that over.
Exactly. Well, and again, if he gets 3 sacks against Boise State, or again, like I said, when I was talking more in depth about that, when it was, if you need to have multiple multi-sack games. And this is a perfect opportunity for Braylon going against. I think he's likely going to be lined up against Cage Casey, the Boise State's freshman or sophomore, but first time starting left tackle. Yeah. So I think that's an opportunity where easily, first of all, scheme wise, they're probably going to add another tight end over there, maybe do a chip or two, but that's an open invitation for Braylon to have multiple sacks against Boise State.
That's a fun one right there. And then, I'm not going to talk about it again. We talked about the linebackers versus Taylon Green and this running core. But another thing is this Boise State team was really, really great against the pass last year. And they're returning a lot of guys. JL Skinner, obviously we talked about how he's off the NFL draft, but that's something where Washington has such a clear advantage. Not just from a player's standpoint, but from a coaching standpoint as well. And it's something where I want to see, and again, I know this is something we've already said, but I just wanted to talk about a little bit more in depth is what can guys like Rome and the Jalens and Trevor Bernard and Denzel Boston, because I'm sure we're going to see them in the game as well, what is going to be asked of them? And especially against one of probably the more solid groups, not in terms of talent, but in terms of coaching and in terms of just what they were able to do in 2022. What are they going to be asked to do? And what are Ryan Grubb's answers going to be against a solid coaching staff?
Exactly. I think that's kind of one of the things, even going back into the spring, I remember a number of players mentioned it where, he goes into the chemistry lab in the offseason and he starts cooking up some crazy stuff when it comes to the offensive scheme, to be clear. But with that being said, I think certainly, I think, we talked about it today with Roman Penix, where there's clearly going to be some new wrinkles to the offense. We saw it a little bit in fall camp, just generically. We saw some different looks and things that the offense is going to do. And I think even more importantly, it comes down to situational, kind of situations, especially on third down. I think that's kind of where everything lives and dies with this game. Because if Washington's able to go 6 or 7 on third down, or even limit your third down opportunities, that's going to be a recipe for success. Because if you're talking 9 and 15, 9 and 16 on third down, that's not necessarily one that's going to be something that Boise State fans weren't going to like. They're going to take that because that means you gave up a number of drives, and that means Boise State's probably in the game a little bit more than they should be.
Do you have a leading receiver for this game, as long as we're just kind of on this note?
Oh, gosh. It's almost like asking Jamarcus Shepard who's better, Rome or Jalen. You know what? Give me Rome 130, 2 touchdowns, 130.
Okay. See, for me, I was going to go a little bit off the books here and not too far, but I was going to say Jalen Polk. I was going to say I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of just go routes up the sidelines, just trying to stretch the defense in any way that they can. And Jalen just has turned into that guy who's just a security blanket over the middle of the field. And he's just going to chip away with 10, 11 yards here, 10, 11 yards there. Then we're going to look down at the end of the day and, he's got 95 yards because, Rome and Jalen McMillan only played like the first half really. And Jalen Polk was the leading receiver in this game. So I feel like there's some logic there, but also some like, I could, I could see these things playing out in this game.
Well, then that's what makes this room so dynamic. This trio so dynamic because everybody talks about Jalen McMillan and Rome Odunze, but Jalen Polk is really almost that release valve, that third option where both those guys are going to get covered. Both McMillan and Odunze are going to draw guys, and that opens the door for Jalen really at a number of different spots on the field because he showed last season he can be that kind of possession receiver, get you 10 to 15 yards, and he can also be the guy that just says, "Hey, I'm going to go and you find me that." Just throw it up and I'll catch it. Did it a number of times. Did it 3 times against Michigan State. So I think I almost wanted to save that one because I'm curious if he's going to replicate that against Michigan State this season.
Ooh, I like
so that's why I wanted you to take that one. But it's also a good way for Rome, especially if he wants to chase a Biletnikoff to go, set the tone there early with a strong opening game.
No, absolutely. See, I think that Rome is going to have his big Biletnikoff moment against Michigan State. I think that him, and then no disrespect to either Jalen, but Jeremy Bernard is going to be a huge factor against Michigan State because I just think that would be there's something this coaching staff wants to do. Just let's throw this dude out there. But we'll get to that more when the time comes. Let's flip over a little bit more back to the defense. I want to talk about the secondary because I'm not super impressed with this Boise receiving core. I know it's solid, but it's not just over the top. Like, I think these guys could actually cause some trouble. And I think that it's something where it's still going to be a test for the Huskies because the secondary was fine last year. It was fine at best. So my questions are just, okay, what improvements are we going to see from the secondary?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of goes back to the overrushing problem. If Taylor Green is able to get out and get outside of the pocket, that means all those routes are going to start breaking down. And that's kind of where Washington at times, especially as the injuries mounted last season, to where things kind of fell apart to where, when you're starting to hold the ball 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds, it's not as easy to stick to your guys. And that's one thing that Morello said a lot of guys have done this fall is they've been on body. They've been sticking to receivers. They've been sticking to Rome, sticking to John. And we've even seen when we were able to see practice, we saw, Rome Odunze go over Elijah Jackson for a catch, but Elijah Jackson was right there. So, it goes in the stat book as Rome beat Elijah Jackson, but it wasn't like he was well without reach. It was just a better ball from Penix and a better catch than it was bad defense.
Right. And just kind of going to the other side of the field here, we can also look at Jabbar Muhammad as somebody who just loves to play the ball. It doesn't matter that he's a little bit undersized. I like the quote from Chuck Morrell on Monday when he said, this guy, he plays like he's 6'2". He's aggressive. He always likes to find the ball. And I think that that's something where, we saw him match up pretty well against Quentin Johnston while he was still at Oklahoma State and Quentin was at TCU. And he got cooked by Rome in the spring, as we've said on the show before, but everybody did. And this fall, he's been so much better. And I think not only is he going to be just a force when it comes to just playing the ball, getting a bunch of pass breakups, we'll see how many interceptions he can turn that into. But I also think he's going to be a pretty solid tackler on the outside. And he might give him some catches underneath, but he's not going to let a bunch of guys get by him. No,
exactly. And I think that's kind of, I remember talking to him a couple of days ago after practice where he said, he really takes a lot of pride in that because, yes, he is listed at 5'10", but he does play at that 6'2", 6'3" level, and he's got the vertical leap to do it. He's got the physicality to match up with guys on the line. He doesn't mind doing either or. He probably is a better coverage guy than being a press corner, but it doesn't mean that he couldn't do that or can't handle the physicality of it. And to your point, he's been in the Big 12. There ain't not many better receiving conferences in the country when it comes to the Big 12 just because of the volume of guys and the volume of throws that come their way. So he's been tested, and I think he's really kind of leveled out this room.
Do you have a game prediction for this weekend?
Oh, man, I've thrown a few of them out. Let's go. I'll say Washington covers, so give me plus 14.5. I'll take the under because I believe the under is 15.5, so I'll go 38-10 Washington.
Okay. Lars, as always, I want to thank you for being here. Everybody out there, make sure you check out all our work on Inside the Huskies at si.com/college/Washington and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review. Leave us any questions you might have. We're going to try to do a mailbag on the Friday show, but that does depend on your questions. So please get them in. We'd love to see them. We'd love to hear any feedback you might have about on the show. Again, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review. We really appreciate it. It's been super helpful to hear all your feedback. We'll see you tomorrow.